everybody. Welcome to our conversation about Europe and side B Christians. We are going to have a fun conversation today. First thing that we want to remind everybody about, as we've been doing these kind of global conversations, is the fact that everybody, as much as they can tell us about the culture in which they live, their experiences are primarily and really solely their own. So we're not speaking on behalf of an entire culture or country or region, just going to be some people that are talking about their personal experiences within that culture. Which is to say, there are countless experiences, and this is only a small sample. But the small sample that we do have today is our friend Adrian, who does live in Europe, has lived in Europe his entire life, and Christian Johnston, who spent time in Europe. Going to give a little bit of their experiences there. So, Adrian, How are you today? How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. The
Good.
weather is hot and it's I enjoy the sun.
Excellent. Oh, I know it's so great. I'm a big fan. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you identify personally within your context, and a little bit about your journey of sexuality and faith.
Okay. Well, my name is Adrian Berry and I live in Hungary. I've lived here for about over 25 years. Been involved in various kinds of Christian work. About the identify thing, I suppose I'm usually just say I'm gay. I mean, at least recently I've said that. Of course, I have to exist in a foreign language, so people don't really know what SSA means here. There isn't any kind of equivalent. There's never been any kind of ex-gay movement here, and so people are not really familiar with that kind of terminology. So if I translated SSA into Hungarian, nobody would have any idea what I was talking about. So it's
Mm.
probably just to say gay, but of course that upsets some people because they think of activism. But I don't mind that expression myself.
I was going to say,
Um,
it's a little easier to explain a word that they already know and give a little more
yes,
detail than to try to create an entirely new conversation
yes.
about it.
Well, the word for gay has two syllables in Hungarian, but if I have to say SSA, then it's about 10 or something. So why use 10 syllables when you
Oh,
can use two
absolutely.
Yeah,
and
I
then
get that
explain it?
completely. Totally.
So my
Christian, how about you?
background
I
is,
know we've
well,
had some conversations with you before, but remind us in case we have some first time listeners a little bit about you.
Sure. So about myself, my identity conversation, I tend to lean towards using gay. Sometimes I will use SSA depending on the context I'm in. The journey for me in sexuality has been probably only the last 8 years of actually working through things. I've more or less always held a side B position in my theology, but only discovered the side B broader world about 4 years ago.
I understand that. It's a long journey before we found people who were
Right. Like,
believing and
you mean
living
I'm
and
not the only
had the
one?
language.
Wow.
I know, right? It's
exactly.
amazing. I love that. We have thousands of people who felt for so long that we were the only ones. Adrian, how about you? Share with us a little bit about your journey of sexuality and faith and what that's looked like in your context.
Well, it's quite a long one because I'm now 67 years old. and so, and I've been a Christian for 40 years, so it's really
Okay.
been quite a long journey. But the the coming out thing and finding other side B people's really, again, like Christian says, it's only been about the last 4 years.
Okay.
But um, I was brought up in a Christian family, so I always attended church, Baptist particularly. Uh, I realised I was attracted to boys when I was about 15, and kind of got in. When I went to university, I was in university in London, and so in the 70s, I kind of lived that kind of lifestyle and didn't bother with the Lord, and then somehow the Lord got hold of me and and turned my life around completely. I had a very powerful conversion experience, and was able to give up the sex addiction instantly, pretty well. And thinking, I'd never heard of side B, side X, whatever, but I think I was thinking in terms of side X. Oh, I've been prayed for now. I'm going to be straight. I'm going to get married and all that.
Right.
And in fact, I did get married, not because I was advised to or because people said it would be, an answer or anything, but just because I wanted to. And I found a woman and we fell in love with each other, and we were completely open with each other about the situation. And later on, I kind of realized, oh, this attraction to men has not gone away. But nevertheless, we had a very good marriage. It was very successful. And God was then calling me to Hungary to move here. And while I was preparing, I went to Bible college to study theology. And during that time, my wife was killed in a car accident. So
I'm sorry.
that was in '91. And I've been open to get married again, but it's just never happened. And I'm quite a happy single guy at the moment. So I'm very content. I think I'm quite well balanced. I don't feel, panicky about any of this stuff. Like I need someone. And I'm fine being single. When I moved to Hungary, I said to the Lord, okay, all this gay stuff, it's in the past. I don't need to mention it. I'm never going to talk about it again. And that was the same for decades. So, that's why I don't know anything about the scene. I didn't have any gay friends. I was just getting on with ministry. I've been a pastor. I've been a Bible college lecturer. And just 4 years ago, God said, I want you to come out and I want you to talk about your sexuality because other people need to be helped. So I struggled and fought for about 6 months, but I couldn't actually say no. So basically that's what happened. So my church is really supportive. They're fine. They're very positive. So and they still give me things to do. I still get to minister, So
Excellent.
So it's fine.
Oh, that is fascinating. I would love to hear more about just all of that goes together sometime.
It's a long story.
It is incredible how the Lord works those things out to get us where we need to be and when we need to be there, and make sure that we're prepared for what He wants us to do. I had the same kind of thing when I went to seminary. I was like, well, that's in the past. We'll just be moving right along right here. And the Lord was like, oh, no, like you don't get to. If you take all that work that I've done and you just keep it to yourself, it doesn't do anybody any good. So
Right.
yeah,
Sweet child, I'm
thank you
working
for
in
being
you.
faithful to that.
Sorry.
It's just wasted pain. That's what I've told people for years. There's no point in
Right,
wasting
that's a good
pain.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. You need to make sure that it has a purpose. Well, tell us a little bit about. I know you've said that been a relatively new thing for you to live within this context of coming out as gay within the Christian community there where you are in Hungary. Um, what do you feel about the context of being gay or same-sex attracted in your home country? You're from England originally, correct?
Yes.
Yes. What would you say are the differences in context between your home country, the experiences you had then, and what it may be like now when you go back to visit, compared to the way things are in Hungary for you?
Um, well, when I became a Christian, I just thought it was all going to be behind me, and so I didn't tell everyone. Not many people in my church knew that when I've been in churches, then the leadership was known. But it's just being kind of, well, if you're okay, then we don't need to talk about it. So, there really wasn't anything going on. I've since realised that in the church I was in North Wales, I was in North Wales for 10 years, and I'm still in contact with that church. I consider it to be one of my supporting churches. I just sort of counting up the people, and I'm sure there were at least like 5 or 6 gay people in that church over the time that I've known it, but nothing was much discussed or talked about or whatever. Hungary, it's very difficult to find anyone else, really. It's my church is I don't know, how did this happen? I say it was about 3 years ago. The Lord started speaking to me about this, and so I gradually started talking to people about the situation. I first told my best friend that I'd known for 10 years and we'd worked in missions, and I'd kind of never got round to saying anything. Finally I did. And then I told my pastor and the elders in the church, and they were just fine. They were very supportive. Then I was asked to give my testimony, so I publicly came out in the church and had an interview with my pastor. And I've not had any negative responses that I'm aware of. I mean, everybody's still cool with me. People, just treat me just like they always have. People have known me for a while.
Good.
So in my own particular home church, but which is quite on, I think it's kind of upbeat and they're moving forward. it's conservative. I mean, they wouldn't be happy with side A, but side B they're perfectly fine with. I've had some negative comments from some people who don't get it. Why do you need? It's sort of like, well, if you're if you're not living the lifestyle or whatever they say, why do you need to talk about it? And I said, it's not for me, it's for other people. That's the answer, basically.
Yeah.
But so some people have been a bit not understood, perhaps. But in general, it's been fairly positive. There hasn't been this great, massive culture war here like there has been in America. I mean, this has been a massive warfare going on for the last 50 years or whatever in America. But in Hungary, it's not really been so much of a subject that's on the.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've wondered about, because I know when we hear in America about anything related to gay culture or sexuality, it seems to kind of fall of a divide between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, moving towards Middle Eastern or areas connected with the former Soviet Union. Of Western Europe is completely embracing and accepting, and people are fine. And Eastern Europe, it's still very closed down. People may experience some amount of persecution because of their sexuality. They're still dealing with legalities.
The harder it is, I think. If you go east from here, say to the Soviet Union or
Right.
Middle East, of course, there's certainly apart from Israel, which is quite.
Okay, yeah, that's what I've wondered how, because I know Hungary's kind of right there in the middle of everything, so I wasn't really sure what that was going to look like for you. So it's good to know that you've had that good support, especially within your church. Christian, how about you? The context that you were in while you were there, how did things look for the LGBT community?
Sure. So I was in Poland for 2 years, and I absolutely adore Poland. So actually, a fun fact between Hungary and Poland, those two cultures throughout time have always been extremely close together. They've essentially never had a conflict, and so they just always get along. So I've always known a little bit about Hungary just because of being in Poland, and probably vice versa. So with that shared commonality there, I thought it was neat that we're both talking about countries that are really well connected. What has been a little bit sad for me is that I started discovering the side B space while I was living in Poland. And back at that time, I was working through a lot of things. I wasn't very open, didn't really share with friends that I had in Poland, but I was very much watching what was happening in the culture at large. Sadly, I can't give too much context for how the Polish church was handling the topic. But what I did notice was that queer women pretty much felt fine on the street being themselves. I would see women kissing and holding hands in more romantic ways, not just the simple friendship kind of way. And that just seemed pretty average in Poland. Whereas the gay men were still very much hiding themselves. You had to really know what you were looking for to spot another gay guy. On top of that, one time my boss and I were having sushi together, or getting sushi together. And there were these two guys sitting nearby. My Polish wasn't good enough yet to really understand what they were whispering about together, but they first gauged the people around them, and when they figured out that, they assumed that we did not speak Polish, but my boss speaks fluent Polish. So once they thought that we didn't speak Polish, they actually started talking about their relationship problems. So even in this context, you have gay people out in public who are trying to be themselves, but they're making sure it's very cautious environment, don't want people to really know what's going on. And I don't know, I just watched a few Polish films that tried to give some context for what that could look like as well. And in general, I'd say that the LGBT community in Poland is in the middle of figuring out what does it look like to be Polish and gay. So it's a harder conversation. That also gave me some red flags about what would ministry look like for me as I continued forward living there.
Absolutely. How do you both feel? You can take turns with this question if you want to. How do you feel that your personal experience compared with other side B Christians possibly around Europe with different cultural contexts, different countries? What do you think your experience has looked like compared to others?
I say it's Eastern and Western are very different. Even the former Eastern Bloc countries like the Czech Republic, for example, is very much more open, I'd say, than Hungary, even than Slovakia. Slovakia and the Czech are completely different. It's interesting to figure that one out. Romania even more so. So the further you go east, the more more the conservative it is. Gay Christian people I've talked to in Hungary, some of them are very much afraid of anybody ever finding out. They're not out. They don't want to say anything. They say that I could never say this to anybody in my church, sort of thing.
Right.
Though there are some others. I mean, I know a Reformed minister. He's in his 40s now, and he's fairly open. I mean, some people are more open. I find people struggle with a double life kind of thing. I know some Christians who are not out, to people, but they'll, go to gay bars and hook up and that kind of thing. And they're kind of honest with me, but they said, it's difficult to get free of that. So basically, I just listen. I'm not really sure how to listen and pray for them.
I say sometimes that's the best ministry you can give.
I'm not really sure about that. I mean, we do have some people in the group who are from or Germany, but I really don't know much about their experience, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, that makes good sense. Looking at how those things have changed, the fact that especially in the church, people have had to live that double life to a certain extent, really as a matter of survival. What are some things that you have seen change about the conversation concerning sexuality across your lifetime, moving from between different countries? What have you seen change that maybe you think are changes for good, maybe possibly changes for bad, but how has that discussion changed for you?
Having said that I was ignoring the issue for decades, I'm trying to think. When I became a Christian initially in Britain, that was in the early 80s, there was a group called True Freedom Trust, which was kind of side B, and that was quite helpful. And so a lot of people, of course, were hiding. They weren't out, and they'd contact, but they wouldn't talk about it in their church or anything. I think there's more openness, certainly in the West, perhaps more willing to admit who they are, and sure people understand that they're side B and that they're in a mixed orientation marriage or a single. I think there's more acceptance of that, I would say, possibly than in the past. But I've never really experienced, whoever I've told, I've never really experienced any really bad reactions. I don't think, either in Britain at the time or since then in Hungary, not any personal bad reactions. And I've had pastors contact me here in Hungary and said, hey, we've got this gay couple coming to church, can you give me any advice, or can you come and visit, or anything? So there is more openness, I'd say. It's gradual, but it is getting better.
Yeah, would you say that the conversation in the church has been relatively open? It seems from like what you've discussed that especially your church individually has been really open and accepting to learning from you and to supporting you. Has that conversation?
Some individuals, I'd say. Some individuals said, "Hey, can I ask you about this or something?" Others just get on with it.
Yeah.
Basically, they're not interested.
Why do you have to keep talking about this? Yeah, I've heard that more than once.
I've had that a couple of times. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do talk about other things.
That's right.
I promise.
That's always the thing you want people to understand. Yeah. Well, Christian, did you have any specific experiences, more from that observational point, since you were in the area for a short time and weren't completely out with the conversation? It kind of gives you more of an observer's perspective of it. How did you see that conversation going?
Right. So I was having a hard time balancing, okay, God, if I'm staying in this country long term, but you're also giving me ample opportunities to invest into LGBT people. Yeah. How am I going to do this going forward? And so I was absolutely watching the conversation going on in culture. I wish I had more experience in the Polish church itself having this conversation. Sadly, I made it a point to only attend service in Polish when my Polish was not very good. And so I couldn't really keep up with most conversations most of the time. However, I'd say that one thing I did notice that was impactful. I made one friend who was side B, who lived even 10, 15 minutes away from me by walking. And so we were connecting quite a bit after we met. It was really great. He was a huge encouragement. I should probably reconnect with him actually. And he wasn't even Polish. He was from a different part of Europe. And through him, I learned that there are actually a number of organizations doing programs in Europe. At least they were in Poland, but they were programs that lean probably far more towards X and maybe XY, but far more into X than Y. And that conversation seemed to be what was happening with the Catholics in Poland, which, of course, Poland is predominantly Catholic.
Right.
And so, from the gay people that I did meet in Poland, they usually ended up being Catholic and they would be pretty repressed or just trying to get rid of at least the public perception of their sexuality. So, I'm not exactly sure that that's simply my perception of what I experienced through conversations. And through observation, but there are actually programs going on in Poland that are going on primarily for men to have the conversation in faith and sexuality, but leans more X.
Yeah, that's
Yes, there is that, I think, going on here as well. Perhaps there's after the whole thing of the ex-gay movement and the last 50 years, and then the collapse of Exodus, and finally realizing that we never ever changed anybody's sexuality.
right.
After we've come to the end of all that in America, then they're trying to introduce it into Eastern Europe. So I find that very frustrating, and I'm going to do my best to be vocal about that whenever I can. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it seems like that conversation you hope would have played itself out, but
Yeah.
there's always room for things like that. Well, looking at one other large conversation that has been going on here has been the discussion about chosen family, looking for community. And you said at the beginning that you've had a very good experience as far as being long-term single and celibate, even after having been married. So how have you gone about finding that type of community outside of having a nuclear family, especially where you are living in a different country now?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I was already a widower when I came to Hungary, so I came as that. I've had various different experiences. I feel now content and well balanced, but it hasn't always been like that. In the
Right.
past. In fact, since I actually started talking about this and I came out publicly, and it was much better than I thought it was going to be. I've never felt better actually. It's been a really good experience, but I've always had one or two close friends. And I still have. I still have a few close friends that I hang out with. It was mainly people in the church, but not always, and some secular friends as well. With me, the language is not a problem. I've been learning Hungarian since I was about 18 or something. So I'm perfectly fluent in Hungarian. It's absolutely no problem to exist in.
Which is a huge statement, by the way.
Yeah.
Can we take a minute to acknowledge that?
Yeah.
Right. It's not an easy language, but I'm just so completely used to it.
Yeah.
And since I came out and since I've been getting involved with Side B, then I've made some really good gay friends as well. Some mainly Side Y, Side B. But I actually have some secular friends because there's a whole bunch of British people living in the area, about 250 people. And there are, I think, 3 gay couples among them. I've got to know one of the couples really well. They probably think I'm weird. I mean, they know I'm gay and they know I'm a Christian and they know I hang out with them. I don't judge them and they don't get me, but
Yeah.
we get on fine. So yeah, I like getting out. I like being with friends, but it seems to work okay. I wouldn't say perhaps a community. Maybe just individual relationships are good.
Yeah, absolutely. In those times that it has not always felt so content, were there specific things that you did in order to kind of rediscover that contentment? Have you learned how to just kind of ride those seasons of loneliness and discontentment?
But I usually manage to find someone I could talk to.
Yeah.
Not all my experiences with the Christian church here have been good either. I've had some pretty bad. My present church is fantastic and I love it. It's great, but I've only been there for 4 years. So the time leading up to that, there was a lot of cool things happened. But it was nothing to do with the sexuality issue. It was just all kinds of other things.
Right.
I think cultural differences has been a problem. It's interesting. You can learn to speak the language fine, but there's still these weird cultural differences that you're not quite sure of, and misunderstandings that can happen. And that went on for quite a while, I think.
I was going to say that sometimes is the challenging part. I know when I've worked with international students here in America, that's one thing that they have discussed is like, my English is okay. I'm still not really sure what to do about, going and visiting at a friend's house or what they're doing. And so they talk about the fact that just being in that different culture can add to loneliness of just always feeling like an outsider simply because of cultural differences. So I've been curious to know if, especially in your context specifically, if there was some sort of like a double dealing with that between just being a gay Christian and then being in a different context from where you were raised. But it sounds like you've done a good job of figuring out how to do those relationships and how to find the individuals in order to support yourself spiritually and relationally.
Yes, certainly. Yes, I feel pretty well integrated. I also became a Hungarian citizen last year as well. So
congratulations!
Congratulations.
Well, I just mentioned one really really weird cultural thing that Hungarians are very often late for things. Everything starts late, whereas I was, taught to be fairly punctual. And so I'd be in a meeting. There's this cultural thing where if you meet an individual for the first time in a day, then you shake hands every time. And that was just really weird for me. And so people would arrive in a meeting late, and then they'd go around and shake hands with everybody, disturbing what was going on. And I thought, this is really so rude. And then if I was late, I'd just say, hi, everybody, and sit down. And they thought I was rude because I didn't go around and shake hands with everybody.
That would definitely take a lot of
trivial example, really.
That would really throw me off.
Yeah, because I tend to be late fairly frequently now that I have 2 kids that I'm trying to keep up with, and I always want to just sneak in silently and pray that nobody notices me. So yeah, that's I don't know that I would know what to do with that. Well, when you're looking, speaking of differences in culture, when you look at what's going on over on this side of the Atlantic, as you see what's going on with North American platforms, people that talk about side B movement here, are there specific things that you really resonate with in those conversations? Or are there a lot of things that you just think, this is so different from my cultural experience, I don't really know how to relate? Like, what resonates and what doesn't with you compared to the North American context?
I'd say more that it seems strange to me. It's not something that I can resonate so well with certain things. I think it's amazing how many people have said that they've come out very, very clearly and said they're conservative and they're side B and they're celibate, and they still get very, strongly attacked by and told that, this is not acceptable, you need to become straight and all this. That's just amazing to me. I just think that's completely unreasonable.
So do we.
Sure.
Well, we've talked about before. I know I've talked with Josh. I'm not sure if we've done it actually in an episode. But the conversation that so much of what is happening in America, specifically in the United States, has to do with language and descriptions and grammar. I mean, you're talking about the difference between nouns and adjectives, and that simply because of that minutia of the conversation, that so many other parts of the world don't have these conversations because it's not something that translates into different languages. And I know you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that the difference between trying to explain same-sex attraction versus just using the word gay in Hungarian. Um, do you think that a lot of the conversations that take place here just aren't an issue in other places, not because of theological differences, but really more a matter of linguistics?
I say certainly the language difference, yes.
Yeah.
That would some of it just seems completely superfluous. Why are they arguing about these words?
Right.
Because gay, homosexual, what is it? Same-sex attracted, experience same-sex attraction. They all mean the same thing anyway. So,
You have to make sure that you say it's ongoing, but also unwanted.
Oh, unwanted.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes,
Mhm.
people need
Right.
to know that you don't want to be gay in order to be. Yeah, yeah. It's incredible how that goes. Christian, have you seen similar things when you were in Poland? That it really just like looking at the arguments and the debates in America compared to how things were there. Does it seem just ridiculous?
What I Because of what I was experiencing, I thought that Poland felt 10 to 15 years behind the United States
Hmm.
on the topic, whether it was culture or within the church. And so, and then considering where the United States is currently, and being an American, seeing where it's at, that's like, oh God, how can it be? How can it still be that far behind?
Yeah.
So I was still stuck on realizing, wow, if I'm staying here, I'm basically living in the 90s
Yeah.
United States in this topic. So I would say that a lot of the conversations that Americans were having was just something that the Polish the Polish church, like queer people in the Polish church, if we were to sit down and have had conversations, probably a number of the things they would have gone, well, we're not even at that point yet, so we're still focusing on this thing right now. Side note, because you mentioned language, I was gonna throw a funny language thing in there for you from
Yeah.
my Polish learning experience. Back when I was a young Polish student, this was when I was 27.
Right.
I was really, really warm in the room one day, and I tried to tell the teacher in Polish because I was going to be so proud of my Polish ability. I'm warm. And so Polish has 7 cases. Technically, 6 of them are actually in use. The 7th is a different story.
Right.
And then I try to say I'm warm. I say, jestem ciepły.
Mm-hmm.
And my teacher immediately corrects me, like, no, 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 Chris, ciepło mi. And as I learned, she didn't explain because Polish teachers are very proper. They will not really explain to you the problem of what you did. What I did, it's exactly the same word, but the case ending is different. Ciepło mi is used because when you say ciepły, you're implying that you're gay.
Right. It's exactly the same in
Because,
Hungarian.
yeah, you're not hot or cold, you're warm. So
Yeah.
I didn't have the heart to also go with it and be like, well, it's true.
Yeah, right. No, I meant what I said.
Yeah.
Right. But also
Well,
interesting
that
point on
too,
that.
but also, can we turn the air on?
Yeah.
Right. Also interesting point on that note. I was learning from my friend who actually speaks Polish very fluently. Poland has lots of vocabulary for the queer space. I just didn't really get to know it.
Yeah.
That's always. I mean,
Yeah, so
that's-
yeah, it's the same in Hungarian. If I say I am warm, it means I'm gay. If I say to me it is warm, then that means, the temperature thing.
Right.
Linguistics is fascinating to me. If I was ever going to go back and just study something for learning, it would definitely be how languages and things like that work when you look at culture and context specifically. Well, when you're looking at how your experience in particular has gone, Adrian, and seeing how you've said that you don't necessarily relate to the North American context. I know, especially, I mean, Americans in general, we can be short-sighted just in general, because we think that we are the center of the universe.
Yes.
But specifically about side B voices in the Christian conversation, we want to ensure that it can be as global a conversation as we can make it. And so, what are some things that you specifically wish that those of us in North America understood about your experience in Europe?
That's difficult. just one thing, just one practical thing is that I see what's happening in this IB Facebook groups, it just seems like people hang out all the time, like physically. They meet each other and go for coffee, and that's so much more difficult here. It just seems that we're so much more spread out, and it's difficult to actually meet each other. I mean, I drove, maybe even just driving the distance, it wouldn't be the same for an American, because I went to see Christian once in Poland. I drove about, I think, 6 or 7 hours, which an American might not think is a big deal, but I had to go through 4 countries to get there.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Yeah.
And there's another guy who lives in Slovakia, and he's like hours away in another direction, and they're about the nearest. Apart from 1 or 2 Hungarians, but not many.
Yeah, that is, I think that level of commitment in order to be able to have embodied community is something that we don't always understand. That's something definitely that I think that we should be specifically praying for our siblings and friends that are in other countries, that it's not as vocal. There's not as large an intentional community that, there are people that are probably there and are around, but either don't have the language to explain where they are or just haven't been able to meet people. Just praying for you. I think
also it's a different culture. It's I'd say it's kind of like an honor-shame kind of culture, not so much as the Middle East, but people are just very ashamed of admitting that they have these kind of feelings and even asking for help. And so I would just want to pray that people would feel, have enough courage to actually get in touch and to start having a community, some kind of community. And a guy just contacted me a few weeks ago because he's seen my testimony. So he's in a Baptist church in Budapest. He's 20, and he said, I could never talk about this in my church. Nobody would be able to understand this. But he said, but if you know any other people, and if we could hang out, then that would be great. I thought, yeah, fine. We haven't yet, but they do kind of want to meet up with each other, but they were afraid of anybody finding out, where they're at.
That sounds pretty consistent with Christian's observation about it being 10 to 15 years behind. I mean, that's growing up in the United States in the 90s. Absolutely. I mean, right. I had friends that I hung out with that we all, I think, probably on some gut level knew that we were all gay, and you could never voice that to one another. I mean, that's not something that you talked about. So, I can see how that would be a big difference. So I think that's something that we should definitely challenge and encourage listeners here to really add to our prayer lists. I mean, just to make that a consistent thing of praying that especially young people will be able to find those who can help them work through those issues of shame and struggle, and be able to find community that can help them understand what that looks like for them and in their context.
That would definitely be helpful, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And let me add, there's actually a resource, and Adrian, I don't know if you'd be willing to mention it, but the group EPIC exists on the internet, and it is a group for Europeans. Adrian, would you like to say anything about it, or?
Yes. Yes, the guy I mentioned who lives in the Czech Republic, he's an American, and he's organized this, I think. 2 years ago, we had a retreat in the Czech Republic, and there were 8 of us there, and Christine was there too. I was there, and I loved it. It was really great. But it's people from as far away as Moldova in the east, and I think England, which was very helpful. Of course, COVID hasn't helped. Things have been just locked down, and we couldn't meet last year. We're hoping to meet in August again, and that.
Could I interject for a moment, Adrian?
Pardon?
There was a funny story from when we did that retreat, because
go on.
it was set up in the town of Malinovice.
Yeah.
And when you read this in English, it looks like it says male novices. And one of the guys was going, "Dear God, like, what is this retreat? What are we doing?" And we're like, no, it's Malinovice.
That's awesome. It's our cult initiation for Samesex.
Yeah, male novices.
That's great. Well, are there any other things that you would like to share, Adrian, from your wealth of wisdom and knowledge of just walking this road for your lifetime of looking at things that you'd like to share. We have a lot of listeners, much like the young guy that reached out to you recently, of people
Mm.
in their teens and early 20s. Are there things that you'd like to share with them just about faithfulness of walking with the Lord these years?
Oh, I've got so many stories about how God has done amazing things in my life, but that's not the
Yeah.
and never left me, and always been there for me when I've needed. I mean, I've had some really great difficulties as well, but when I've really needed God to do something, He's always done something. I just say it's worth it. I mean, some people say, "Oh, you've given up, having a possible relationship with and all this, and
Yeah.
you're single, and that must be really terrible." I thought, but it's worth it. I mean, there's nothing like walking with Jesus, and I mean, I just wouldn't have ever had it any different from what I've had these last 40 years. And I'm saying I'm happy. I'm fine. I'm contented. Some people find that difficult to understand, but I am as a single guy, and the fact that my sexuality hasn't changed, it just doesn't bother me anymore. It's
Yeah.
fine. If God's fine with it, then why shouldn't I be fine with it?
I love
So
that.
I'm happy. I wouldn't be anything other than a Christian. I'd do it all again. It's just stick at it. Don't give up.
I love that. Sometimes that's all the encouragement and the word that we need. Christian, do you have anything that you'd like to add, kind of closing up here?
Yeah, just to wrap up that, I'm really glad that the group Epic exists. So far it's proved to be a space where the odd end Europeans around Europe are able to network a bit, and hopefully that can continue to be a space for Europeans to build a network. I didn't chime in your previous thing, but I meant to. I was going to say that two of the things for me that were important, as I ministered to and desperately love Europeans even now, was for the queer European, seeing that they don't have the spaces presently in the church to necessarily vocalize. And of course, I'm primarily speaking towards Eastern Europe, not necessarily Western Europe, and of course, more specifically the Polish context. But wanting to see resources provided for Christian Europeans to be able to start sitting down at the table and having these conversations without shame and fear.
Yes.
My friend was kicked out of his church in Poland because of the fact that he was gay, and so having a heavy burden in that realm, but then also being encouraged that with the vast diversity that Europe presents, in a way, America can be a little bit homogenous,
Yeah.
more or
Yes.
less.
Yeah.
We tend to have a lot of similar thought, but Europe is just so diverse,
Yeah.
so variant, that there's going to be so much beauty as the European church, like, the 50, 60, however many plus cultures that represent Europe, start really getting into this conversation in the years to come. I'm really excited to see what beauty is going to come out of that space. And I think we're going to be really encouraged by that as well. I mean, we already are in some ways. We may not always see it, but even more so as the voices get louder.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
I'm encouraged as I look at Europe, but also desperately praying for Europe.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the diversity that I love. The more that I study different cultures and peoples and looking all of those, I mean, just the vision of Revelation 5 when he talks about every tongue, tribe, and nation, and even, I mean, coming from an American context, that's still, I just think, oh, different colors, because we have so many races and people, but you're right about us being a very generally homogenous sort of culture, even though we cover such a large area geographically. That I've always thought, oh, it's going to be a lot of people that look really different. But as you begin to just expand your perspective globally, that it's not just based on what we look like, but different
Mm-hmm.
cultures and understandings and interactions and languages.
Yeah.
And the more you see the vastness of humanity, the more you can recognize the vastness of God and the fact that we reflect his image. Just how fascinating it's going to be when we do finally get to spend eternity not fighting over grammar. but getting to just worship together fully as ourselves, as diverse and varied as God created us to be, that in our perfected state is going to be how we get to spend eternity. And the more
Mhm.
diverse group of people that I meet, the more excited I am about that idea.
Thank you for the gospel
So
goosebumps. I
I know,
appreciate it.
right?
So exciting.
I love thinking about it. Well, Adrian, thank you so much for sharing about your experience. We would love it here at the Life on Side B podcast for those of our listeners who are in Europe to share with us your experiences. What resonated with you that you heard from Adrian and Christian? What might be completely different? We talked extensively about differences between Eastern and Western Europe and differences between countries. But if you are able, email us, share with us, connect with us, and let us know what your experiences are like. And we'd love to be able to meet back together and share some of those in different conversations at a later date. So, Adrian, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Christian, it is delightful as always to get to talk with you.
Pleasure.
And thank you so much for spending time with us to let us know what things look like for you in Europe. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.